branch of service?
Navy.
And your highest rank?
Water tender, second class petty officer.
Okay. And in what general locations did you serve?
I was in the general locations.
Yeah.
In the South Pacific.
The South Pacific. Okay. And were you drafted or did you enlist?
Drafted.
And where were you living at the time of being drafted?
In New Britain, Connecticut.
And do you recall this day? The day that you were drafted?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The day I was called into the service?
Yeah. Tell me about
November 11th, 1943.
Could you describe the day for me?
The day was a trip to the railroad stations, train to New Haven, Connecticut.
Okay.
And that was where they gave you your physical exam and made you available to all branches of the service if you were physically fit.
Okay.
And initially, the interviewer was a Marine and said, "Okay, you're in the Marines." I says, "I would like to go into the Navy."
Yeah.
He says, "Well, what's wrong with the Marines?" I said, "Nothing, but I would like to go into the Navy." So he passed it along to the Navy recruiter.
Okay. Why the Navy?
Well, I felt that the high-ranking officers were on the same ship I was, not in the background. And if the ship was to go down, they were going to go down with me. And then I felt I could sleep in a clean bunk every night rather than a mud, a trench with mud holes.
Sure.
So that's what influenced me into the Navy.
Okay, and then, so you were able to select the Navy?
Yes.
In New Haven?
Yes. They stamp you general service, so you were physically fit where the Navy would accept you.
So do you remember your first few days of service?
Yes, we went to Sampson, New York, was where basic training took place. And there was 6 weeks of basic training.
What kind of things did you do in basic training?
Just marched around, went to different classes, aircraft recognition and ship recognition, and basically to get all your injections for all the diseases you may encounter, apparently.
Yeah. Do you remember your instructors in basic training?
No, that I couldn't tell you.
No. Were there any memorable experiences from basic training that stuck out?
Yeah, it was awfully cold up there.
Yeah.
And, oh God, sickness, people were sick all the time. The barracks were just wooden barracks with one heating furnace.
Okay.
And the rooms were, or the barracks were as cold as could be.
So how did you get through it? How did you get through basic training?
You did the requirements for basic training, and then they put you in outgoing units until they decide where you're going. From there, we went to Great Lakes, Illinois for basic engineering school.
Okay, so from basic training you went to engineering school?
Yeah, we took aptitude tests at our boot camp, and the gentleman that interviewed me for my aptitude, for my placement, was on the bunk below me. He was a banker, and he was drafted into the Navy, and because of his experience, they gave him a permanent job there as an interviewer of people that took the tests. So I had a connection. He said, "Andy, when you go for your interview, make sure you hang back and wait for me." So I did. When he reviewed my aptitude tests and how I explained I would like to be aviation machinist mate, he says, "There are 2 openings, you're guaranteed one." So then I went to basic engineering school, which I thought was a prerequisite for advanced machining after that. After basic engineering, we were sent to Philadelphia.
Okay.
And they said, "You're going to 5 days of boiler school. I said, boiler school? The only boilers I ever knew were the ones you heated a home with. And these were as big as garages.
Okay, so after basic training, you went to the engineering school.
Yes, for 6 weeks of
engineering.
At Great Lakes Naval Training Station.
And then to Philadelphia.
Then to Philadelphia.
Well, tell me about Illinois, the engineering school. What was that? Was that different from basic training?
Of machining, how parts are machined, machinery that are used for machining the parts, which I was well aware of because that was what I was apprenticing before I went there.
Okay, so that's stuff you were doing anyway.
Yes.
And then
but after that wasn't stuff I was doing.
So boiler school was foreign.
Oh, God.
What was Philadelphia like?
It was just at Philadelphia Naval Base, and they had the boiler training there, but it was only 5 days just to expose you to it.
Okay. Okay, so your time there was only for 5 days?
Yes.
Okay.
So then from there we went to Newport, Rhode Island. There we practiced rifle range shooting and marching, and it was just a preliminary to being assigned to a ship. There they assigned us to the ships that we were going to get onto.
Okay.
And I was assigned to the USS Wilkes-Barre.
Okay. How long were you in Newport, Rhode Island?
Oh, maybe 3 weeks, that's all.
Okay.
From there we went to Camden, New Jersey, where the ship was being built. And it had been no, it wasn't commissioned yet. They were still working on it. And every day we stayed in civilian barracks. Oh, God. I don't want to interrupt this. No, let it ring. Let it ring. No. And every day we would spend 8 hours a day on the ship learning the fire room and all the paraphernalia that went with it.
Okay.
Then the ship finally left there and went to the Philadelphia Navy Yard where it was commissioned. And you went into your engineering spaces and just trained.
Yeah, what kind of training did you have there?
They expose you to all the boilers, how they operate, all the machinery involved with the operation of a fire room. Each fire room, there were 2 fire rooms. Each fire room had 2 large boilers face to face. And this is how you started as a man that operated the burners on the generating the steam for everything.
Yeah.
The entire ship worked from steam.
So that's what you were charged with primarily?
Yes. And then as you advanced in rank, I eventually became chief of a watch, where you were in charge of the watch. With most times were 6, 7 men on each boiler, assigned to each boiler, because there was more than just the boiler. You had to operate the pumps that supplied the water for the boilers, that made the steam. And I was there for, I don't know how long the period. And finally, my division officer came and said, Andy, we're transferring you to the what's called the oil shack. He says the gentleman there is getting transferred back to the States to be put on another ship. You will be in charge of the fuel oil on the ship. And the fuel oil on the ship is very, very in-depth.
In what way?
You had like 62 tanks that held the fuel oil, but the boilers only used oil from 4 tanks. The rest of them were reserve tanks. And every 4 hours, a tank was transferred from one boiler and refilled. You refueled every 3 or 4 days while you were at sea, and usually used maybe 250,000 to 350,000 gallons in that period of time.
Wow. So a typical day for you was just...
I was in charge. I had 3 gentlemen that stood the watches. I no longer had to stay watches, but I was in charge of ballasting, unballasting, and designating their duties.
Okay.
And on a ship, every time you emptied a tank of fuel oil, you filled it with salt water, because they never had left empty tanks, empty voids. If you ever got a hit with a torpedo, if you had an empty tank, it just amplifies the explosion. So you fill them with salt water. And then the night before you were to refuel, and you never went with empty tanks, so the night before you refueled, maybe 9 or 10 o'clock at night, they would come and tell me we're refueling 5 o'clock in the morning. So that was my job, ballasting and unballasting the ship, because that was a critical part for the damage control officers. If they ever got a hit, they had to know where the fuel oil was, how you could transfer it, how to transfer ballast so that they could keep the ship afloat.
Sure.
So that primarily was the chief's duty on the ship, Chief Oil King.
Okay. So while you're on the Wilkes-Barre, how long were you on that ship?
I was on that ship from January of 44 till I got discharged in 46.
Okay.
Did
you see combat while on that ship?
Pardon?
Did you see combat while on that ship?
All the time, out in the Pacific.
Yeah.
We were assigned to what was then the Fast Carrier Task Fleet. They had all the aircraft carriers. They did all the pre-bombing of all the Japanese held positions prior to any invasions. Months before an invasion, the Fast Carrier Task Fleet would attack all the airfields and everything with the airplanes. Now, this I don't know how much in depth you wanted it.
As in depth as you remember.
The Third Fleet constituted 4 task groups. Each group had aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers. A typical group was maybe 2 battleships, 2 aircraft carriers, first-line aircraft carriers, 3 escort carriers, which were smaller, and 2 heavy cruisers, 4 light cruisers, and 20 destroyers approximately. And there were 4 groups like this just on the horizon of each other, which made up the Third Fleet. And then when admirals were relieved and went back for reorientation, it became the Fifth Fleet, because people thought there were 2 different fleets, but all it was when there was a change of command, it became the Fifth Fleet. And then
same ship.
Back to the Third Fleet. Yeah.
So you saw combat, you say, often.
Yes.
When was the first time you saw
The first time was the Battle of the Philippine Seas, which was not so much surface battle. We really never had a surface battle. By the time we got out there, the Japanese Navy was pretty well wiped clean, although aircraft were, daily they went out on missions, and they pretty much destroyed the whole Japanese fleet by then. So we were on no surface battles.
Okay. So the Battle of the Philippine Seas, what was that like for you?
That was mostly the aircraft carriers again, their planes after Japanese shipping.
Okay.
But then after that was kamikazes every day.
That's the type of combat you saw mostly, was
Yes.
kamikaze attacks?
Yep.
What was that like to experience?
Very scary.
Sure.
First you'd hear first they'd sound air defense when planes were detected in a certain distance.
Yeah.
Then they would sound general quarters, where everyone had to get to your battle stations, and they secure the entire ship. Every compartment is secured and not reopened for anything. And then you hear the guns going off. First you would hear the 5-inch guns, which were the main air defense guns. And then you'd hear the 40 millimeter guns, which there were many of, and that tells you the planes were closer. Then you'd hear the 20 millimeter guns, you know, they're on top of you.
Yeah, even closer still.
You know. So during your battle stations, before I was put into the oil shack, you had 4 hours in the fire room, and then 4 hours you were in a repair facility just above the fire room. And you alternated every 4 hours.
Okay.
And a typical day, you would go to your battle stations 1 hour before sunrise, because this is when the Jap subs were most volatile, because at sunrise, you know, the sun on the horizon, you couldn't detect periscopes and stuff. So 1 hour before sunrise, every day you went to your battle stations. Then you would secure from there, and maybe the planes would leave the aircraft carriers 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. Again, you went to your battle station. As long as the planes were off the carriers, you remained at battle stations until the last plane came back 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And that, when you were at your battle stations, again, was 4 hours on your duties, 4 hours in the repair crew.
Okay.
But when I became Chief Oil King, my battle station was the oil shack, where I directed my men to transfer oil, because during the day, a boiler, 1 tank of oil wouldn't last in the boilers, so they would be transferring oil during that entire day.
Sure. So when you were at battle stations, what did that entail? Where?
My battle station initially was the fire room.
Right.
But then when I became Chief Oil King, it was in the oil shack, where I directed everything from there.
Oh, okay. Okay, and then...
The oil shack was a room right next to the engineering office. It was 2 levels above the fire room.
Okay. So the fire room, the repair room, and then...
Fire rooms were the lowest portion of the ship, and they were 2 levels. The steam drums, where the steam was generated, was on the upper level. The lower level was where all the... Wait, they're being interviewed, Marie.
If we want to talk about the Battle of the Philippines, what was the next time you saw combat?
After that, it must have been the attacks on the Japanese homeland.
Okay.
The first carrier, not Doolittle, was the first carrier raids on the Japanese homeland, but their raid was not to return to the carriers. I don't know if you're aware of this. They bombed Tokyo, and from there they were going to China to land. And our first encounters with Tokyo, planes went in and came back to the aircraft carriers. That was our first.
Okay. So did you see kamikazes at this junction as well?
Kamikazes were after us all the time. They would keep us up all night, because they would stay in contact range. Radar would pick them up, I don't know, 20, 25 miles. And they would stay those distances and drop flares. And they would keep us all at our battle stations all night, as long as they were in the area.
Okay.
But at night, they never attacked at night.
No?
No.
Okay.
Then this one day we were at our battle stations, and I happened to be in the repair crew at this particular time, and I was leaning against the side of the ship, and all of a sudden it's going in and out like this, and we had one man on the phones all the time. What's going on? We're alongside the aircraft carrier Bunker Hill, which was hit by suicide planes, and we rammed up against it, and we're fighting their fires from our ship because they lost all their power. And some of their men that were stranded, not on the main deck because that was too high, they had belly blisters, they were called, and they were gunners in there, and they jumped right onto our ship from there.
Wow.
And there was one gentleman from New Britain that finally got recognized as having caught one of these sailors that jumped off the carrier. It was in the local newspapers, and it said that he was on the Wilkes-Barre. And I said, "Oh my God, I have to call him up." So I gave him a call, and he said, "Yeah, they finally gave me a medal for having saved this one person's life." And he says, "Don't you go to the reunions?" I said, "No, I never knew they had it." And so he says, "I'll send your name in." And from then on, both my son and I went to all the reunions.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So.
Yeah, we took. Our whole side of the ship was damaged when we rammed into the aircraft carrier.
Did you take casualties at that time on your ship?
We took a lot of their wounded. What they do is shoot what's called a breeches buoy onto the other ship, and they have baskets that they lay the wounded in and haul them back on. And our mess hall was closed, where we put all their wounded in the mess halls. And then 13 of them died. That's all on one that we took onto the ship. Then we had burial at sea for those 13, which was the saddest thing I ever saw.
Yeah.
When you see just the thing tilted over and down they go.
What's that experience like?
Awful. They have the entire ship comes to attention on the back end of the ship, and you salute them, and they fire away, and then they tip the board, and the body goes down to the bottom of the sea. They weigh them down in canvas sacks. They weigh them down. They used to put a big 5-inch shell in there for weight.
Did you experience that often?
No, just that once we had the burial at sea. It was the only time we had taken wounded onto our ship.
Okay, so did anybody that you
No.
with on the Wilkes-Barre?
Didn't do anything. No, these were
From the other ship?
from the other ship, from Bunker Hill.
Okay.
No, we had no casualties.
No casualties on your ship?
We had a couple of wounded. It was in one of the records. They got wounded by shrapnel that fell off other planes and stuff.
Okay. So that's fortunate. Nothing off of the
No.
ship then.
But when they had the invasion of Iwo Jima, it was very interesting. They called up people to, they secured from general quarters. We just had air defense because we were bombarded. Normally, we don't go into shore and bombard when they have the invasion. They had another fleet, the 7th Fleet, that was the invasion fleet. But one of their battleships was overshooting enemy positions. So they hauled that out, and they dispatched our cruiser in to take their place. So we were, I don't know, 200-300 yards off the shore, bombarding it.
Yeah.
We carried 2 Kingfisher seaplanes, and they would do the spotting for us for our, main battery, direct the firing if we were overshooting, whatever the target was to be. And all we did there was drift a certain length, firing all the time where they called for support from the naval ships. Then you'd get motor back to make another round, drift down, firing all the time.
So were you able to, that's pretty close, you were able to see it?
Oh yeah, they let us watch from our ship because there was no fear of enemy retaliation there. They had neutralized all their airfields. And
what was that like to see?
Oh, what a sight. We could see they had the whole PA system tuned into the Marines on shore, and you could hear them calling for support in certain areas, and you could just watch the planes peeling off and going to that area because they had a whole map display in our lounge. You could see exactly where they were calling from, the Marines, for support. See the planes peel off and go to those positions and strafe them and dive bomb.
Yeah,
it was very interesting.
Sure.
I happened to be on deck and witness all this.
Yeah, that must have been something to see.
So our last tour, we were out for 2 months without seeing land at all.
Wow. Okay, so that was the longest stretch that you were on the ship continuously?
No, that was the longest stretch without seeing any land at all.
Oh, okay. I
But
understand.
otherwise, you'd go out maybe 2-3 weeks, and then come back to a group of islands, which were the Caroline Islands, where we had a naval base and minor repairs you could do there, and you'd stay there 4 or 5 days, and then out to the battlefields again, or the battle areas again.
Sure. So that you got to watch was Iwo Jima.
Iwo Jima, yeah.
And then next was Okinawa. That was next.
Okinawa was after that. We were in the invasion of Okinawa, excuse me, supporting that whole invasion too. Our planes we were not in on the actual invasion. Again, that was the 7th Fleet. They were the invasion fleet.
Okay, so you laid support for
Air support, yeah.
What was that experience like? Did you get to witness?
Again, it was just defending ourselves from enemy aircraft.
Okay.
And we did a lot of shore bombardments where we would leave the task group or our group, maybe 8 or 9 at night, and the 4 cruisers would be assigned shore bombardments. And like, I know we were bombarding a submarine base one time and an aircraft base another time, and then you'd do that till maybe midnight, 1 o'clock, and then come back and join the fleet again.
Sure.
Hi, Bob.
The interview for
Yeah,
the Wilkesboro. How you guys doing?
Doing well. How are you?
this is my son who
Hi.
Hi, I'm Bob.
went to all the reunions.
Yeah.
Oh,
He's got his camera on.
yeah, I coordinated a bunch of the reunions. So it's
Okay.
yeah,
Sure.
good. It's a great thing you're doing.
Then after the war, we went into Tokyo Bay with the lead ships, the Missouri, where the armistice was, or the surrender was signed. Then after that, we had a demolition crew assigned to our ship, and we went to different cities of Japan, naval cities, and blew up midget subs, which they had many of.
Okay.
We had the demolition crew. We would haul the subs out so far out, they would stay there, put demolition charges on them, blow them up.
What was that like?
We would just watch them from a distance
Sure.
as they, put charges on there. Then they would come back to our cruiser and set off the charges, blow up the subs.
Yeah.
And they had many midget subs.
Yeah.
Oh,
Is that what you saw most of? Was the midget subs
after the war ended.
after the war? Yeah.
Yeah.
What other?
Then we were all anxious to come home after the war.
Sure.
And they said, you are hereby detached from the 3rd Fleet. You will join the 7th Fleet in China. So we went to China.
Okay.
At that time, we had many the communists, it was still nationalists that ruled China. And the communists were just coming to their strength in the northern parts of China. And we had many marine posts throughout China. And this is what they did. They would put a big naval ship as a bluff to protect the Marines. But
Sure.
our Marines never got attacked, really. And that's what we did we went to maybe 4 different Chinese cities.
Yeah.
I'll never forget them names. Tsingtao, Qinhuangtao, Taku. And we stayed in China, and I was fortunate. When we were in one port, they had we had Marines in Peking. It was Peking back then, it's Beijing now. And they let us go, so many from the ship, on 2-day journeys to Beijing.
For a little R&R.
Yeah, so I was one that got to see it. Not everyone was able, we weren't there that long, but I was fortunate to be one of them that got there. And
What was that experience?
that was beautiful. We toured the Forbidden City, which was the old Chinese monarchs that ruled it. Beautiful architecture, unbelievable.
How long did you stay?
2 days, that's all in Beijing.
Mhm. That's incredible. That
Yeah, that was quite an experience.
while you were on the ship, how did you, or were you able to keep in touch with people back from Connecticut, your family?
No, all your mail was censored. Oh, we were able to receive mail periodically. You didn't get it continuously, but all your outgoing mail was censored.
So nothing got out.
You could never mention where you were, what you did, or anything.
Did you write letters anyway?
I used to write to my wife every 2 or 3 days. We weren't married at that time,
Okay.
but I also cheated. I kept a daily log, which you weren't supposed to do, in case you were Japanese were able to get it. In fact, my son has it.
Oh, is that right? So you were able to write and receive letters?
Yes, you got mail, not too often, maybe once a month.
What was that like?
It was so nice hearing from home.
Sure. Yeah, what kind of things did you talk about with your then girlfriend? Or
Yeah, just how you miss each other.
Sure.
You couldn't talk of anything you were doing.
No. What about on the ship? What was the food like?
Horrible.
Yeah.
It was good food, but I don't know how they massacred it so bad. I went into the Navy, I weighed 192 pounds. I came out, I weighed 138. I just couldn't stand the food they had.
What did they serve you?
Oh, God. And when they had chicken, it was all camouflaged in a white sauce, and just couldn't stomach it. And the only things that were good were desserts once in a while when you got them. But there were times where we were so short of food supply on a naval ship, you wouldn't believe it, that we were rationed 2 slices of bread per meal. That's it. And there were so many bugs in the slices of food you got. We had to pick them out and eat the rest of it. You wouldn't think in a modern Navy, right? But until you got to a fuel supply ship, you didn't get there every time. They were with the refueling group each time, but different ones would get to the supply ships at different times. You always got to the ammunition ships and replenish your ammunition, but not the food supplies.
Different priorities.
Yeah.
So
I didn't think the food was too good.
Yeah. So you were always in good supply of ammunition. But
Oh, that's the first thing. Ammunition and oil.
Okay.
And water. I took care of all the water on the ship too. Drinking water and boiler water. And the first and foremost was boiler water. And you evaporated you distilled all your seawater for the use on the ship. And you'd be surprised how much water was used daily on the ship. For drinking water and cooking and everything, you used average of 24,000 gallons a day. And then boiler system was a completely closed system. As the steam was generated and used in all the equipment, it went back and was recondensed into water. But leakages and all the machinery, when you restarted, the condensation that was in there had to be drained, and you'd have to add maybe 12,000 gallons of water a day into your boiler water system.
Wow.
And as the evaporators got scaled up, what happens with the salt water, the tubes that heated up to get the vapor off the salt water would get covered with brine. It would attach themselves. So as time went on, the efficiency would get less, and at times it got so low that we had water hours on the ship, because utmost was making water for the boilers. You couldn't let them get out. So people who were in showers many times, I almost got crucified when I shut off the water pumps.
I'm sure that must have been stressful.
Yeah.
So was that the most stressful part of your job, keeping up with the water?
No, ballasting and non-ballasting the ship. Had to make a daily report to the damage control officer of the tanks you had water in, the tanks you had oil in, a listing of all the tanks.
What did you do to handle that stress?
What did you do to handle it? You handled it.
Easy as that? Did you have a good luck charm, or did you have a...
I'll tell you how stressful it was. When I first got transferred to the SOSHAC, I don't know how much of this you want to hear. The gentleman that was in charge was getting transferred in 2 weeks. So he says, what do you want to learn? I says, how to transfer oil. We'll keep the ship moving. So, okay, that's what we went through. And he finally got shipped out. And I think 2 days went by and I got a telephone call from the damage control officer. We don't have a listing of the tanks that were emptied of oil and ballasted with water. I says, well, sir, I'm new here and I haven't gotten to that point yet. He says, well, you better get to that point by tomorrow morning and have a list up here of what tanks have oil in, what tanks have water in. So up all night with the blueprints, how do you ballast these things? So I finally got them all ballasted with oil, with water. And then came time to unballast. Again, I took out all the blueprints. These are the pumps you use to unballast everything. And when you unballast, you open all the tanks that have water in and start pumping the water out of them. And as each one gets, you have, to each tank, you have an indicator that tells you the level of fluid that's in there. And as each tank got emptied with salt water, you'd close that off so the others would get out. Came time to refuel. We were supposed to take on 350,000 gallons. We took on 300,000 gallons of oil. My God, what happened? Well, the first time they transferred oil out of one of these tanks we refueled, the fires went out in the boiler. And that's a nightmare. If you lose your steam, you can't keep up with the fleet and you would get
left behind.
So I had the whole system contaminated with salt water. On unballasting, you unballast to a certain level with a large unballasting tube. Below that is what's called a stripper line, which I knew nothing of, and there was that much water in every one of those tanks that we refueled. I was up night and day pumping this, stripping this water out of those tanks, stripping this water, so we wouldn't lose fires in the boiler again, and I was ready to jump over the side.
Wow.
But then when I got it all organized,
Never made that mistake
no,
again.
then it was just routine. But when you get transferred into a whole, you can't believe the network of pipes and ballasting on a ship, because if you get a hit, they have to be able to transfer oil, water from all over that ship. That's why the damage control officer was in charge of all that, or wanted a record of all that. So if you got a hit, they could try to keep the ship afloat.
Right. So that was the most stressful part of your
Oh,
job.
that was the most stressful.
And just by handling it.
Just by trial, nobody to turn to, nobody.
It was just you. You were the only person who had that responsibility.
The fellas that stood watches, they didn't know anything about that. There was only 3 of them anyway. They only did what you directed them to do.
How did people entertain themselves on the ship?
When I was in the fire room, you entertain yourself by 4 hours on watch, 8 hours off watch. You went to your bunk and slept. 4 hours on watch, because in between there, you were at your battle station. So sleep was very, very deprived.
Yeah.
No entertainment. I used to go 2 weeks without even going above deck, seeing daylight.
Really? What was that like? Living underneath the ship.
That was your routine. Between your battle stations and standing your watches. Sometimes when you finished the battle stations, you happened to have that watch to be on. So you went right down on watch. You didn't do much sleeping.
No. There's not much downtime at all.
No, the 4 hours, as I say, you had 4 hours in the fire room, 4 hours out. Those 4 hours out is when you could get some rest, try to sleep. Then you'd be back down. And you stood your watches, like I say, 4 hours on, 8 hours off, because there were 3 shifts of 4 hours. So if you had the 8 to 12 watch in the morning, you had the 8 to 12 watch at night. If you had the 12 to 4 watch, you had the 12 to midnight to 4 watch in the morning.
Right.
And once every week, you would alternate. If you had the 8 to 12 watch this week, you would have the 12 to 4 watch the following week. No days off.
Nothing. Was there any preferable watch? Was there any time that it was more?
The 4 to 8 watch was the best because when you got off watch at 8 o'clock, you could go and sleep. The 8 to 12 watch, you would have to relieve the people that were on the 4 to 8 watch so they could have breakfast. And the 4 to 8 watch at night was relieved by the 8 to 12 watch so they could eat supper.
Wow. Wow. So there weren't any opportunities for downtime.
No downtime. No downtime.
Did you have the opportunity to see any USO shows? You had the R&R in
They would.
Beijing.
When we went back to the fleet, where the fleet, the Carolina Islands, where we went back to,
Right.
then we could watch. They'd have movies up.
Okay.
You had blackouts here, but we had movies up on the main deck. One night we were watching a movie, and then all of a sudden, just off a little ways, big explosion. Oh my God, what was that? General quarters sounds right away. Everybody get to your battle station. They thought some midget subs had got into that lagoon where all the ships were, but 2 enemy planes had sneaked in. That was normally out of the range of Japanese planes. But 50 miles from this was a Jap-held island, which they had neutralized. So there were no planes or anything on there, but they didn't bomb, they didn't take it over. But they somehow accumulated enough fuel where 2 Jap planes landed there, refueled, and made it to where we were and dived into this aircraft carrier while we were at anchor, while we were watching the movies.
So you would spend, what, 4 or 5 days refueling?
Refueling?
Yeah, how much time did that take?
2 hours, 2 or 3 hours.
Oh, okay. And when you were in the Carolina Islands?
When you went into the Carolina Islands, you stayed there maybe 5, 6 days.
Okay.
You'd have to clean some of your boilers, repair machinery that had been broken down.
So there wasn't any downtime there either?
No downtime, not in our division.
Yeah. Okay. And then...
Other divisions, when we refueled the ship, they had time off because of refueling. But we did the refueling, so we had no time off. No time off.
So other people on your ship were able to...
Yeah, they get a break at that time.
So what kind of things did they do?
Yeah. Hang around.
So you said you kept a journal,
Yeah,
a daily log.
yeah.
How did that help with your?
Every day they would print out a sheet of your activities for the day, and they would send them out to all the entire ship. So you pretty much knew what you were going to do, but those had to be destroyed daily. But like I say, from those sheets, I kept a log of what we were going to do,
Yeah.
where we bombed. But now on the internet is the same accounting of pretty much of what I had written down.
Sure.
But during wartime, they didn't allow it.
Right. Did that help you get through?
Yeah, it was good because you could sit and record and keep a record of what you were doing.
Reflect a little bit.
Yeah.
Sure. So after the war ended, you went into China with the 7th Fleet,
Yes.
and then when were you discharged from?
From China, we came back to, we were detached from the Atlantic Fleet. We were assigned to the Atlantic Fleet even until we came through the Panama Canal and got to the West Coast. Then we became assigned to the Pacific Fleet.
Okay.
After the war, we were still assigned to the Pacific Fleet, so our home base was going to be in California. Anyway, one of the places in California. But while we were overseas, the captain of our ship got transferred. We got a new captain. He was transferred to the Philadelphia Navy Yard, charge of the Navy Yard. Our executive officer was also transferred back to the States, and he was transferred to the Philadelphia Navy Yard in charge of repairs. So, us being assigned to the Pacific Fleet, they were lost, but they loved their ship. That was their first ship, and they wangled and waggled till they got us assigned back to the Atlantic Fleet.
Oh, okay.
So while I was home on leave, when we got back to California, I took the first leave group for 30 days.
Okay.
While I was home on leave, I got a letter from the ship saying, as soon as you report back, we are lifting anchor and going to the Philadelphia Navy Yard. Oh boy, was that good news. Because from the Philadelphia Navy Yard, I came home every weekend.
Yeah, that's a quick drive.
Yeah, well, not a quick drive, but at least you had a chance to get home for weekends. So that was a blessing when we were transferred back to the... So after I got back to the ship, we left and went back through the Panama Canal and up, all the way up to Philadelphia. There was no berths for us, so they tied us alongside another ship until they emptied a berth. Then that's where I was discharged from.
Okay.
From there I went to Lido Beach, Long Island. That's where they discharged you.
Okay.
And when you got home, you wondered, what is it like to be a civilian?
Yeah. What was that transition like?
My God, no commitment. When you're in the service, you know, every hour you're committed to something. But I said, oh my goodness, I'm free. I don't have to go anywhere. I don't have to do anything.
Ate better food.
It was quite a, yeah, oh yeah. Quite a transition.
Yeah. What was the first thing you did when you got back?
I got married a month after I got discharged, and then I went back to work in the factory.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I worked in the same factory for 42 years.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and there I started out as a machinist there,
Yeah.
and then when they started with this first numerical control machinery, I got the first access to them.
This was
So-
in New Britain?
Pardon?
This was in New Britain?
Yeah.
What company did you work for?
They're on New Britain Avenue in Newington. They were a Cable Tool and Machine Company was named. I worked for them prior to going into service. There were two partners, and then they split up while I was in the service. So when I got out, I went with one of them who I enjoyed working with, and I never left there. And then when they, as I say, they got their first, it was called tape control machinery there. It was a machine ran by punch tape. And then from there it progressed to computer control, and I became head of that department, programming and maintaining them.
Okay. So you didn't go back to school?
No, we got married and I never went back to school.
Then, yeah. Did you have a homecoming when you got back?
Not really. Not that I can remember.
No.
Everything was going so fast then. I got out in May and we got married in June.
Oh wow, yeah. That is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, do you keep in contact? I know that you said you saw someone in the paper who you're on the ship with. Other than him, do you keep in contact with anybody else from?
No, only from those that we met at reunions.
Okay, so you have been going to reunions.
We went to maybe 14 or 15 reunions,
Yeah.
and the last 5 of them he ran.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah. They tried to recruit me, and I said no. But then they said, "How about you, Bob?" Oh, yeah, okay, I'll do it.
What are those like? What do you guys talk about?
We went. The first one I went to was in Florida, Orlando, Florida. Then we went to Atlanta. We went to the Philadelphia Navy Yard. We went to Baltimore. And we went to Washington. We had them in Washington. We had it in South Carolina. Mostly on the East Coast. They only had one in the Midwest, and I didn't go to that one. I didn't want to go travel out to there.
Sure.
Then we had it in Boston, Philadelphia Navy Yard, all along the East Coast.
Yeah. Those, as far as your military experience go, how has it influenced your thoughts on?
I respect anyone in the military.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. In as far as the veterans organization.
I belong to the VA. In fact, they just gave me hearing aids, and I have a primary care doctor at the VA.
Yeah.
They treat me good.
Good. Yeah.
I get my medication from the VA.
It's a good relationship. So how do you think the service has affected your life?
And made a man out of you real quick.
Yeah.
You grow up real quick. The responsibilities I just explained to you on a 21-year-old. Because they were so short of personnel then, anyone with any ability, they moved them right along. In fact, I had taken the test for first-class petty officer, and I passed the test. And a week before I was to get my rating, they went back to peacetime standards, where you had to be a second-class petty officer for 18 months and before that was half the time, 9 months, you could take the test to advance the rank.
Okay.
And they went back to peacetime standards, 18 months. And our recruiting officer on the ship was in our division. And he used to spend all his days in my oil shack, hounding me. Re-enlist. Andy, you'll be first class. Andy, re-enlist. I said, you couldn't make me re-enlist in this Navy. Not with that job.
Yeah.
Maybe if I had a good job, I could think of it, but not. That was too demanding.
They kind of took everything out of you and you just didn't want to come back.
No way.
No.
It was like, when I got out of that, it was like a burden.
Lifted up.
I'm free. Because there you were responsible every day for something, every day.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you remember from that time?
I think I've bored you enough.
I don't think so. Any funny stories that you have that share at your reunions?
That's it. I remember when we shot our first plane down, we were sitting in our compartment and we were playing AC-Doocy. It's, a board game. And, we hear the guns going off many times. And over the PA, somebody hollered, "Hey, we just shot our first plane down." And here we were playing AC-Doocy. We weren't at our battle stations at this time, but they had two phases. You were at air defense. They would always sound air defense. Then all the main deck would have to maintain man their guns. And you still wouldn't be at your general quarters battle stations. That would be the next phase. And apparently planes had come in before they even sounded general quarters. But when they sound general quarters, I don't know, I think they gave you about 5 minutes to get to your battle stations. And I can tell you, I never slept through one sounding of general quarters.
Yeah.
It would start out with a bell going off over a whole PA system. Bong, bong, bong. And before that third bong, you'd be awake. I'd be awake.
Were there men who would sleep?
Pardon?
Were there men who would sleep?
Maybe a couple of them, but somebody would shake them up and get going.
Yeah.
Because you had a limited time to get to your battle station. Then they secure the ship. They close the hatches and they don't get opened. And every compartment had an officer in there with a 45 on his belt. You don't touch those. They get locked in. The fire rooms, my God, there's a hatch maybe that wide and that deep that comes down, and it's locked in with bolts along the whole edge of it, but locked in from above. You don't open it from below. If you get a hit, you don't get out of there. Well, there was one escape hatch.
Okay.
One person at a time could exit it.
Okay.
But if you got a hit down below there, you weren't going to exit it.
No.
You're down 2 levels below the water level.
Were you scared?
You did your job. You didn't even give it a phase. I never was scared.
No. Did you miss home?
Oh yes, you missed home.
How did you overcome that?
I don't know. You just knew where you were, and that's it.
Well, if there's nothing else that you have to add, then we just want to thank you for your service, and then thank you for taking the time.
You're very welcome.
And that'll be
I appreciate you gentlemen doing this.
We appreciate your story.
Yeah. World War II, you know, it was a blessing when they said the war is over. Oh my God.
Yeah, where were you on that day?
That was one of the 89, not 89 days, the 2 months we were out to sea.
Yeah.
The last time we hit a port was in the Philippines. And when we left, as soon as we left there, they said, we will not see land again until we see Japan. That's just the way they put it. And that's what it was. We were out there day after day after day.
And how did you get the news? Over the PA?
Oh, yeah.
What was the reaction amongst?
Oh, God, everybody cheered.
Yeah.
Then we went in with the initial ships into Tokyo Bay.
Yeah.
We could see the Missouri where they were signing the peace treaty. A lot of the ships didn't go in and anchor in the bay, but we were fortunate, or we were one of the ships that were assigned to that.
Yeah.
But they still were suspicious of the Japanese. They had so many midget subs that the Marines were on guard on the decks of the ship all the time we were in there. They were two-man midget subs, imagine that, suicide subs. And if we ever had to hit the island of Japan, oh my God, these things were all ready to defend themselves. Well, thank goodness for the 2 atomic bombs. That ended the war.
Yeah.
As brutal as they were, we would have lost a lot more lives invading Japan.
Yeah.
Too many civilians were, you know, the sad part. But it certainly ended the war quickly.
Yes, it did.
Hope we never see any of them. Atomic warfare.
Yeah. It would have been a tough invasion.
Boy, this Middle East is powder keg.
Yeah. Okay. Well, from there, like I'll say it again, that we want to thank you for your service and thank you for your time.
You're very
For
welcome.
the interview here.
I bored you enough.